questions. Welcome, Dr. Nick.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, well, for today, I think we've got a pretty interesting topic. I think it affects just about everyone. And why don't you tell us about what it is, and we'll dive straight into it because I think there's so much here to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the topic that we thought we'd discuss today is around coconut oil and the health benefits around coconut oil. Obviously, it's promoted widely as a healthy food. And so researchers have, because it's only come on the scene in the last decade or so, researchers have been trying to catch up and really understand its health effects, because some people say, well, the medium chain triglycerides in coconut oil are healthy, or the polyphenols are healthy, or the saturated fat is healthy. So researchers have been trying to play catch up and really understand what does the science tell us about coconut oil as a healthy food as compared to vegetable oils or other sources of fat. And so finally, we have research that combines 17 different studies that have been done that really lays out what the cardiovascular, so heart disease, stroke specifically, what the effects are of coconut oil on our cardiovascular system.
Okay, before you go on, I wanted to mention that I mentioned that this affects just about everyone. And the reason I say that is because if you really study the ingredients of foods that you're eating, I think you'll find that this coconut oil is in so many foods. You may not have even you may not have that realization until you grab that label and start reading it. But what do you think about that? I mean, is it just?
Oh, absolutely. Coconut oil, palm oil is in everything. It certainly affects our environment. Even sustainably grown coconut oil, you have to think about the environmental effects. What potentially, when rainforests are cut down in order to plant coconut plantations, what that does to ecosystems. But it's also, true that sources of oil, refined oils, are things that are used widely in the foods we buy in the supermarket, because it's an easy way for food manufacturers to introduce these ingredients that have lots of calories and have purported health benefits, but aren't particularly healthy sources of calories. So they're, like you're mentioning, they're used quite widely.
All right, so let's dive into it. What is going on with coconut oil?
Well, coconut oil, it turns out, is a source of saturated fat. And what's unusual about coconut oil is that most vegetables either are low in fat or have mono or polyunsaturated fat. Their fat can be divided into two sort of buckets, saturated and unsaturated. And instead of going into the weeds about what's the differences, we can generally categorize. This doesn't always hold. But we can generally categorize animal sources of fat as saturated and vegetable sources of fat as unsaturated. Okay. So your nuts, your seeds, avocado, those are all generally, even olives, those are all high in unsaturated fats, generally speaking, with a few exceptions. Whereas cheese, beef, milk and so forth are generally high in saturated fats. Coconut oil, it happens to be a vegetable or a fruit, I should say, actually, that falls into the bucket of high in saturated fat.
Okay, so that's bad, right? Automatically, that's bad.
Okay. Well, good question. So, that's where some of the controversy has come in. We, for decades, health experts, researchers have identified that saturated fat, you can actually mathematically, I didn't know this until doing some of the research when I was reading this article, there are mathematical equations that can predict rises in your blood cholesterol levels just based on the amount of saturated fat in your diet. So if you say, okay, I'm going to start eating more of this food that has this much more saturated fat, there obviously it's not completely predictive because we all react slightly differently to the foods we eat, but there's a general, on a population-based level, if you started adding saturated fat to the general American diet, we'd be able to predict what, the way that our cholesterol levels would increase as a result.
So there's a direct correlation between the consumption of saturated fat and elevated cholesterol levels?
Yeah, and even more strongly than correlation, we have good randomized controlled trials that there's causality. So it's not that they just rise together and maybe they're related, but there's some other variable that's driving it. No, we know very clearly that saturated fat drives increases in blood cholesterol levels.
Okay. All right. So getting back to coconut oil,
Yeah.
it's one of the oils that is either higher or just has saturated fat as compared to different plant oils. Is that right? Is that what makes it different?
Yeah. And one of the things that, there's a lot of interesting little nuggets about how coconut oil has been marketed in a way that makes it seem healthier than it is. I think, just on the face of it, we generally think, oh, it's plant-based, so it's going to be healthy. But that saturated fat, it turns out, increases blood cholesterol just like all the other saturated fats that we encounter in the world. So what the researchers for this study did is they took 17 different studies, like I mentioned, and they looked at how coconut oil consumption over short periods of time affected blood cholesterol levels. And what they found is that it consistently increased blood cholesterol levels by about, what they found is substituting coconut oil for other unsaturated fats, from seeds or nuts, what have you, olive oil, whatever kind of vegetable oil was being consumed, whenever that substitution took place, the average increase in LDL, bad cholesterol, was about 10 milligrams per deciliter, which translates to about 5 to 6% increase in risk of heart attack or stroke.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I have always heard, like, word on the street from me is that coconut oil, although it may have some benefits, like you mentioned, is worse than many animal products. I've heard that, and I guess I've heard it's because of the saturated fat. This is just a generalization. This is just based on nothing scientific, but it sounds like what you're telling us with with this new information coming out is that there is no question here, right? And that this is going to be an overall negative to your health.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I would, what this study really firmly establishes is that if you're looking for oil to cook with, and, we obviously, think you should cut out cooking with oil as much as possible. So I definitely recommend just cook with veggie broth. But if you're going to cook with oil or you're going to do some baking and you need to use oil, don't use coconut oil. It'd be much better for your cardiovascular health to use any other kind of vegetable oil. Now, again, and I try to make this point in the article I wrote, it's better to get away from refined oils altogether. But even when you compare, even though we know that vegetable oils are unhealthy, if you put it next to coconut oil, it's even worse. Now, I wouldn't say that the saturated fat in coconut oil is any worse than the saturated fat in animal products. In fact, animal products have a lot of other unhealthy nutrients in them that can, that are beyond the scope of probably this conversation here. So, I think that when people raise the point about, polyphenols in coconut oil are healthy and may help with, hyperinsulinemia or glucose sensitivity, prevent diabetes. Those, based on this study, again, those effects seem to be not statistically significant. Coconut oil didn't protect against, developing diabetes or pre-diabetes compared to vegetable oils. But, there may be, because we know that all plant foods carry some nutrients, there may be some in coconut oil. But what we really know from all the research is that once you start refining foods, like coconut oil, turning coconut into coconut oil, you lose most of the helpful nutrients that are part of the food itself. So,
yeah, I can see that. So what about whole coconut? If someone's looking for those benefits, you'd automatically say, yeah, eat some coconut, right? Just
yeah,
eat the
well,
coconut.
yeah, we don't have research, and so I make that caveat. We have some small studies, but in terms of the large analyses, people haven't really looked specifically in a randomized controlled trial fashion at the health benefits or harms of eating coconut flesh. What we do have is population studies. So we have populations of islanders out in Polynesia,
Right.
that have, in those atolls where one of the only things they can eat is coconut, and they eat lots of coconut flesh. And those individuals tend to have very low risk of cardiovascular disease. Now, they're also eating, living an active lifestyle, and they're eating
Right.
high fiber, low sugar foods. So, it's obviously our total diet that matters. But I think
Yeah.
that, I would approach eating coconut the way, even coconut flesh, like coconut flakes and so forth, the way I think about nuts, maybe in moderation,
Right.
and specifically when it's called for. I wouldn't gorge myself on coconut flakes, or make it, a habit to eat a lot every day.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that you mentioned these folks out in the Pacific, right? They have a
Yeah,
different lifestyle, right? They're probably not anywhere near as sedentary as we are here in the United States or in other countries where it's basically revolving around computer screens, like we're
exactly.
working on right now.
Yeah.
So they can afford to have a higher percentage of their calories from fat and not see because they are literally working it all off, right?
Yeah, and from their childhood, we talked, one of our previous conversations was about how, when they ultrasound toddlers, they can find fatty streaks, the precursors to atherosclerotic plaques that end up building up and ultimately bursting to cause heart attacks or strokes. And, those individuals, they're living a healthy life from day one. So it really makes a difference and that's why, we're always talking about lifestyle, because it's that consistency of the way you live that over time really protects your health.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, what about what? Tell me what you think of this. Like when folks usually talk to me, mention something about oils. Like you said, it's less. It's a less than desirable form of that food, right? There's the
Yeah,
whole food form would be best. So I tell folks, I'm like, well, look, it's a highly any oil is a highly processed version of that food. So most of the benefits are literally extracted, right? And
yeah,
what you're left with is just basically the fat with a few of the benefits of that initial plant remaining, and that's it, right?
absolutely.
So okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
they've done research looking at, I mean, one of the fiber is clearly, and
okay,
it's only becoming more and more important, is clearly one of the most important parts of the food. The part of the food that we don't digest ends up being one of the most health promoting parts of the food, not only because of the way it regulates our metabolism, increases satiety, but the way now we know it nourishes our microbiome. And in the microbiome itself, that ecosystem of bacteria, protozoa, viruses that lives in our intestine, in our large intestine, sends signals that regulate all kinds of different aspects of our physiology. The way our organ systems work is in part regulated by this ecosystem of different plants, different bacteria, viruses, protozoa, and so forth. So it's really important that we consume diets that are rich in fiber. And obviously, we're not getting any of that in refined oils. And then on top of that, a lot of the nutrients that we want to be getting from foods, micronutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, they're attached inside the matrix of fiber. So, when people say, oh, don't peel all the, don't peel the outside of the apple because the peel is where all the antioxidants are. Well, it's true in part that when you lose that fiber, a lot of, for a lot of foods, the outside fiber, there's fiber inside the apple too, but that outside rind of fiber does have a disproportionately high amount of antioxidants, phytonutrients.
Mhm.
And when you start stripping that fiber away, whether it's in juice or in oil, you lose a lot of the key nutrients that end up fighting oxidative damage and helping a system repair, increasing the amount of detoxification that our cells can do. There's
Awesome.
this area of science is incredibly complex. We barely understand it, but it's very clear that the more we respect the integrity of foods, the healthier we are. So,
like that.
I think the message in the general public is, stay away from added sugar. Added sugars are bad. But the same is true for refined oils. Refined oils are probably actually worse than added sugars, but the message of how harmful refined oils can be just hasn't, unfortunately, captured the public's imagination the way added sugars have. So that's really, I think, one of the most important messages that needs to get to the public at large, I think.
Okay. All right. So oils in general should be avoided from what you're saying. And then
Absolutely.
coconut oil is one of the least healthy of all of the oils. Is that the
Yes.
takeaway here?
Yeah. And that's really the outcome. Again, the outcome of this research isn't necessarily hitting the conclusion you and I would hit, which is, avoid them altogether. This is just trying to see, if you're going to use oil, what's the healthiest one? And we have relatively good data from the Mediterranean diet studies, the Predimed study that was done mostly in Spain, showing that extra virgin olive oil can be healthy when you're eating it instead of a bunch of animal products. And this is another piece of data that, again, 17 different randomized controlled trials comparing different kinds of vegetable oils, canola oil, soybean oil, extra virgin olive oil, to coconut oil, and showing that for our cardiovascular health, you definitely want to stick to vegetable oils if you're going to use an oil.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Well, so you're always a wealth of information. We're so glad to hear this update, and hopefully folks out there watching will incorporate this into their daily lifestyle, their daily diet, this knowledge, and just live better lives because of it. And if folks want to contact you, what is the best way to do that?
Well, feel free to visit my website, nickborjamd.com. And there you can sign up for a free consultation to talk with me, and I can help you make the lifestyle changes you want to make to reach your best health.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Well, we look forward to seeing you again soon here with our next topic, and who knows what that might be, but I'm sure no matter what, it's going to be a topic that's going to have a direct effect on everyone's lives out there and just make them better. So thank you again for being with us.